This is Talk It Out, the Women's Agenda podcast. Tune in for your weekly download on the latest news, trends and ideas affecting your career or your business. Here's your host, Angela Priestley.
Hello and welcome to Talk It Out, not Work It Out as we were previously known. This is season 2 of our podcast on Women's Agenda. We decided to shake things up a bit, give it a slight change, shift the status quo as we like to do. But really in this podcast we try and talk some of the key stories that we've been writing about and discussing on Women's Agenda, try and throw in a couple of leadership tips and a few little bits and pieces regarding what we're reading or listening or just things that have really caught our attention that we're really keen to talk about. I have in the studio with me our contributing editor on Women's Agenda, Georgie Dent.
Hello. So good to be back here.
It is. We have seen each other since we last spoke in this studio, but
it
is nice
to be in here. That would have been quite a big absence if we hadn't.
That would. It was quite the gap. Also with us in the studio today is Anne-Marie Elias. How are you?
I'm fantastic, and thank you so much for having me back.
That's okay. We had you on about 6 months ago now. We heard more about your story. Obviously, you were named our agenda setter at the 2018 Women's Agenda Leadership Awards, and you're doing some amazing stuff with all these hackathons, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But this is, we're really trying to ramp up this podcast. It's weekly now. We'd love your any recommendations you can give. You can share it, you can tell people about it, you can give a review on iTunes, which obviously helps us a lot. And a reminder also that we put out a newsletter every day on Women's Agenda, sharing the latest news, ideas, tips, tricks, leadership, and we cover politics, tech, business, career, all the fun stuff, and it's right there in your inbox and it's for free. So I just wanted to give that little reminder. We have so much to discuss because a lot has been happening in our space, particularly in the last few weeks. So today, our key topics, we'll be discussing merit. We've talked about it before, but we'll talk about it in quite a different context today. Imposter syndrome, financial inclusion, and I've also got a little bit of time at the end because I want to hear some key recommendations from all of us in here today. So, merit. There's been a lot of debate and opinions and persistent attacks, I guess, on gender targets, particularly on boards. The suggestion of gender targets in the Liberal Party, which has currently got quite a dismal record on women's representation, which looks like it has gotten a little bit worse following a recent pre-selection. So, merit, Georgie.
Yes.
Now, one thing that came up in The Australian over the weekend, Chris Corrigan had some interesting comments that you actually alerted me to, suggesting that he felt on his one of his previous boards that he felt bullied by certain organisations on this to push for female directors. It was an all-male board at the time.
Yes. And I mean, it is curious because his definition of bullying does amount to, in reality, it was a couple of letters that were sent. So, I mean, I think what is interesting is that in a number of, firstly, unfortunately, it's worth noting that even though it has been a while since we've had a podcast, in that time we have not seen any meaningful shift in the numbers for women in leadership in either politics or business.
Yeah. So our podcast didn't work.
I know.
Was that the problem?
Well, that's why we're back. We're back, and we're hoping this time, in a few months, we can resolve this. But I think in the last couple of weeks, there's been two things in particular that have kind of brought merit back into the into discussion. The first thing is the fallout from the Banking Royal Commission. We've obviously seen that AMP's female chair, Catherine Brenner, resigning, has really opened the floodgates in terms of not just Catherine Brenner's individual performance, but in terms of the performance and existence of all female directors. I mean, you could be forgiven for thinking on reading some of the coverage around Catherine Brenner that no male chair in Australia's corporate history has ever misstepped. because her misstepping certainly has seemed to prompt a lot of discussion that how dare these women even think about holding these positions.
Yeah, well, these women absolutely don't have any merit whatsoever. I think
Apparently
that's where it's heading at the moment, and how dare a lowly investment banker get to that position, because no other lowly investment bankers have ever been able to work their way up to those sorts of positions of power previously.
Exactly. I think Chris Corrigan's remarks do actually sort of shed light, I should say, on the sense of entitlement that I would say certain male corporate leaders feel about those positions. And I mean, the reality is that men still hold, I think it is at this point, 72% of all executive positions in the ASX 200. Okay, so they are the overwhelming beneficiaries of merit. You would think if you look at those numbers, and I think that it is quite telling, because there has been a sort of concerted push in recent years for there to be some focus and even action on increasing diversity on boards. The pace of change has been glacial, but it has actually happened.
There definitely has been a shift, and it looked like the 30% target that the company directors were pushing for was definitely on track. Obviously, losing 3 directors from AMP on the one day.
Yeah, that is significant.
Yeah.
But I think it is what we're seeing now. It's almost like, because of Catherine Brenner's high-profile scenario, it now seems that there's a lot of people who have been quite resentful of the push for women on boards to come out and say, well, we don't necessarily... I mean, one of the comments that Chris Corrigan made was that, the push for gender means that we're not necessarily getting the best person for every job, which... sort of presupposes that in the history of Australia's corporate history, we have only ever had the best people for the job. And I mean, the reality is, and this is the problem with merit as it is brought up, it is actually a mask for bias, because merit is in the eye of the beholder. People tend to find more merit in the people that look the most like themselves. And that's why we have these numbers that perpetuate.
Yeah. And Kara Swisher has a great term for this. She says it's not a meritocracy, it's a meritocracy. And she talks about that in the context of Silicon Valley. And I think that's really powerful. It's just people looking like each other.
Yes. And it's the same in the Liberal Party. There has been, a lot of discussion recently with good reason. I mean, I saw something last week that said that the current number of women in the lower house in the coalition is lower than it was in John Howard's first term in 1996.
Yeah.
And in that period, Labor have gone from having 4 to 24.
Yeah.
And why did that happen?
Because there were targets.
Yeah. Well, not quite targets. I mean, quotas.
Well,
really,
quotas, effectively. Yeah.
And I'll tell you what I think is really sad is if you look back at the history of the Libs, I believe that they actually put the first woman into Parliament.
They did.
And then you had the likes of Amanda Vanstone and others who were in non-traditional female portfolios. So they were actually in male-leaning type portfolios. And I watched this back in the 90s and I thought, wow, this is pretty cool. So they've got women and they've got women in non-traditional portfolios. This is really cool. And then I don't know what happened, but it declined really badly. And it is not acceptable. Particularly because Jane Caro actually said the unspoken truth that the Nats have quotas in Cabinet. But I can tell you, as well as having been a member of the Liberal Party for 17 years in New South Wales, there are also quotas for factions.
Yeah,
exactly.
And
of course,
having come from more the moderate faction, I would always scratch my head at the right-wing people that were less meritorious than others that would be foisted into a position because, we have to be friendly with the left and right and the Nats, and we have to include them. So this idea that the Liberals don't do quotas is absolutely incorrect.
Yeah.
And when you think of how the parliaments, both state and federal, have declined, like we had 2 leaders a few years ago in Malcolm and in Mike Baird that were the most popular leaders of all time, and they've gone to absolutely nothing in 2 years. And that is actually quite remarkable.
I've got to stop because I'm just the member of the Liberal Party for 17 years. What happened after 17 years?
I was finding myself disagreeing more than I was agreeing publicly online, and given that I have a bit of a profile, it started to become uncomfortable for me because I was thinking, well, why am I a member of something that I'm fighting? And I don't agree with a lot of the social policy the Liberals have ascribed to. I was devastated when Gladys changed the laws to remove people from Martin Place, because when you look back at the history of the Libs, people like Menzies created the widow's pension and child endowment. And there was, yes, an economic rationalism, but there was a social heart. And, you know, so I'm going to say something a bit controversial now, that not all women have a social heart either. So, you know, I guess it's a challenge to try and bring diversity in all kinds of ways, not just women that all come from lawyer or financial sector, which is what the Libs tend to attract. You know, we need women from social work, and we need women from the not-for-profit sector. I'd love to see someone like Tracy Howe, who has led NCOS, to be a politician. Because the social heart is everything that she does. And so I think the problem at the moment in the Liberal Party is a lot of women are resigning because of the things that they're seeing in other states. Pre-selections are completely stacked. And I've pointed this out on Twitter, that if a woman wants to run for any parliament, you have to have the numbers. Right? You have to have the numbers in your branch. And that means signing up people. And it's really not that hard when you think about it, but the blokes have been doing this for a really long time. And no one's really teaching or helping the women to know how to stack branches so that they have the numbers, and when they go for pre-selection, no one can take that away from them.
The merit, they have the merit, then that then translates to the merit, and that's in that kind of situation, that scenario. Which,
I think the thing that I come back to when thinking about merit is that the numbers tell the story.
Yes.
You know, the numbers, the fact that there are so few women in leadership roles across the board, whether we're talking about academia, business, leadership, universities, you either have to believe that merit is a fair and equitable system, then you have to conclude that men are more meritorious than women, because otherwise why do they have all those positions? The reality is it's not an equitable system. Merit is very subjective, and I think the result of that is what we have in the Liberal Party, for example, where it shows without concerted effort the numbers won't change. You know, I think Liz Broderick made that remark many years ago, and it's relevant in so many settings. But if you don't intentionally include, you will unintentionally exclude. And that is what I think we are seeing in business and in government. And the Liberal Party can say, you know, women just need to work harder. We only appoint women on merit. The numbers speak for themselves. And if we are to believe that merit is working, and we are to believe that women are not as well equipped, they're not as capable, they're not as educated, they're not as talented as men are. And frankly, I don't buy that.
I think the reason I don't buy that is because I think the performance tells the story as well, and we're currently seeing how some of these ministers and backbenchers are performing, and what they're up to on the sidelines as well.
I mean, I know it's a bit cheeky, but I've always sort of thought Peter Dutton is like the personal antithesis to merit. I feel I've always sort of felt like his inclusion at the table, you know, back when Tony Abbott unveiled his cabinet in 2013 with a single woman and sort of had the audacity to say,
well, they're knocking at the door.
You know, I mean, there were some women knocking at the door, but they just weren't quite
They weren't working hard enough.
Exactly.
That as Jane Hume suggested on Q&A recently.
They weren't
is that
Peter Dutton.
Women need to work harder.
Joyce.
They were bitter. Apparently women do need to work harder, be less bitter, and you will get there, which I think
is very
the comments regarding that spoke for themselves as well.
This is a commercial break for Work It Out. We'll be back in a moment. But if you're interested in being a sponsor for Work It Out or Women's Agenda, just drop us a line and let us know. That's womensagenda.com.au.
So I might move on to another topic now, and that is the topic of imposter syndrome. Completely different from merit to imposter syndrome. I guess it came up last night on a panel I was moderating of women in tech, and quite senior women in tech, and all of them said that they experience imposter syndrome, and much of the audience, pretty much everyone in the audience, had their hands up to say that they had experienced it or were still experiencing it as well. So to both of you, do you experience imposter syndrome?
Hell yeah. I mean, the fact that I'm sitting here, the fact that I won the award last year is shocking to me, because I feel like I'm a massive imposter. Because what do I know about tech and startup? I'm so new to the field. All I know is social justice, and that's all I've ever done. And so I feel you've brought me into the mainstream. So I feel like a massive imposter that someone's just going to tap me on the shoulder and go, "You used to work in community organisations. What the hell are you doing here?" I'm just waiting for it. And I was actually talking to somebody about it last night, that like my life with my family isn't perfect and yet I'm going out there trying to save the world. And he reminded me that's everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody has a level of skepticism about themselves, and especially when you're foisted into a bit of a limelight situation, you get scared that someone's going to say, "But you're not the person that you're saying that you are." And there was a
And has anyone ever said that to either of you?
imposter? No.
I mean, only on Twitter after I go on Sky News.
But there were also comments about your appearance and your earrings and your outfit and
a lot,
various other things that you should not have been wearing. Yeah.
Yeah, look, I actually, I did experience it quite badly recently, and it was very stark, I thought. So I was very fortunate to have been invited earlier this year to Sweden for the Stockholm Forum on Gender Equality. And I mean, when I first got the email invitation to that event, I thought it was spam, and then I thought it was a mistake. And then when the Swedish government got in touch about it and I realised it was real, I fortunately the wheels got into motion and it was possible for me to go over there, which I was incredibly grateful for, and sort of blew my mind that I was there. But the first full day session, and I mean, there were leaders from, Sweden had 3 senior ministers there, Norway's foreign minister was there. They were incredibly powerful, interesting people. And I sat there for the first day thinking, I should not be here. I was in my head thinking about all the other women in Australia who would be better suited to be in that room. And it really threw me, because I had been so looking forward to it, and I got there and I did love the 3-day program, but there was one day in particular where I actually just felt incredibly uncomfortable, and I sort of had to have a talking to with myself later when I got home that night, and just sort of thought, you know what, this is ridiculous, because there are other people who are very good at what they do and that could benefit from being here, but in this instance I'm here, and there's no point me spending this time expending energy worrying about the fact that maybe I'm not good enough.
Yeah, I think it's funny what you say. That reminds me of that saying that if you are the smartest person in the room, go and get in a different room. And maybe that's the case with imposter syndrome. If you're not feeling like an imposter, it might suggest that you're not actually challenging yourself and you need to be somewhere else. And perhaps that's when we're at our best, is when we're feeling like that, because it suggests that we are actually challenging ourselves. We are feeling and thinking outside the box. We're doing something different. We're well out of our comfort zone.
Yes.
Maybe that's another way to think of it.
I also do wonder, and I don't know what the research on this is, but I don't think imposter syndrome is an exclusively female affliction. I do know a lot of men, and I think who feel that, and I think you're right, and in that it often occurs when you are sort of outside of your comfort zone. But I think there are some personality traits that leave you open to that more, and possibly it is the case that women experience that more than men do. But I do think that imposter syndrome is also something that affects men.
I wonder if men know what it means. I mean, that's the thing. Maybe we're just talking about it more. I mean, I even opened this conversation just assuming that both of you knew what I'd be talking about by suggesting that. But it'd be interesting to try and survey that with our male friends and colleagues to see if it is something that they ever think about or comes up, or if they even know what we mean by saying that. Do you have any tips, Anne-Marie, about how you get through it?
I talk to a lot of people. Like, the other thing I want to point out is I'm often the only non-English speaking background person in the room, really. And I came here when I was 7, so I actually feel like I'm Australian. And so then I think when you were saying that you think of all the other people that could have been there, I think of people that, like Violet Rumiliotis from Settlement Services International, that's been fighting the diversity fight around women and non-English speaking backgrounds. She should be here, not me. But like you say, I mean, we've all got different perspectives. We still support each other out there in the world. And I think you've got to talk to yourself sometimes and go, you know what, I'm 52. I've been doing this for 30 years. If I think I'm an imposter, then so be it. But I have got street cred, and I do the hard work. So it's not like I just fluff around and just turn up to things. I do really a lot of background work in everything that I do. And then that gives inspiration to others. And I know I've got a ton of young women from non-English speaking background following me on Twitter that are feeling that, man, if Anne-Marie can do it, so can I. And that's all I think that you can then become, is that person that becomes that face that assures these younger women that are coming through that, an ethnic woman can go on Women's Agenda. She can win that award. She can run hackathons. She can be in the tech space, and she can be invited to talk about topical things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Definitely. And so speaking of some of your work, I wanted to move on to financial inclusion and looking at the hackathon that you are running this weekend. And I thought I'd just share one of these stats that I read on the website from Vibewire, which is at Economic Modelling. So this is from Strategic Project Partners. It shows that if just 7% of Australians who are not financially included become included, it would lead to a reduction in government spending by $2.6 billion. That's just 7%.
Yeah.
So that's an impressive figure right there. The website then talks about the typically financial exclusion typically impacts individuals who are Indigenous Australians, sole parents, aged, homeless, victims of domestic violence, possibly with living with a disability, who are mentally ill, and who are from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds.
And predominantly women.
Predominantly women across those as well. So, Anne-Marie, I mean, that should be reason enough to run a hackathon on this, but perhaps to hear from you, what was the rationale to get started on this?
You know, we've been thinking about it for a while, because last year we did a number of hackathons on homelessness and on family and domestic violence, and then this year we did mental health. And the one issue that crossed all of them was financial inclusion. You cannot get ahead in life if you don't have security of income. And it really raised a whole lot of questions for us. Around young people, we have a whole generation that is only ever going to work on contract. They will have no sick pay. They will have no holiday pay. And they will have no super. And that is really scary. And then you look at women across the board, and women who stop and have children have less super. I mean, I'm in that situation myself, right, where I stopped, and in fact I invested in my then husband's super, and then when we divorced, the laws kept changing, and at that period the law was he gets to keep his super. So I got none of his super, and yet I invested in it financially. So things like that are really, really scary. And when you think that financial exclusion is the basis of a lot of these social ills, we felt it was imperative that we tackle that issue. And even though it's very complicated, some of the people that we're looking at, like the specific problem statements, one is going to be around women, particularly older women, because we know that older women will end up homeless. Like, the likelihood is increasing every day. And apparently when you're over 50, you struggle to get into any type of permanency around work. You also don't get loans. It sort of reduces your capacity to repay a loan. Then the other area would be young people leaving care. I always talk about that because it is devastating that every year thousands of young people turn 18 from the care system and they get thrown out into the world. But they're not given any support to, they get given $1,500 from the state and $1,500 from the Commonwealth, and that's supposed to be their welcome to your life. And you and I know, like, it's so hard when you've got good family and friends to even get your life together at 18, but these kids don't have that. And unfortunately, the way the foster care system works, it cuts out at 18. So for the families that are foster caring, they don't want you to stay. They can't afford for you to stay because they don't get paid for you to be there. So I know there's a push generally at the moment that is acknowledging that a lot of these kids, in fact 60% of kids that you see on the street, have a trajectory from foster care. It's also very common that if you look at adult prisoners, that their trajectory of life has started in foster care as well. So I think, us looking at that problem a little bit more closely, the discourse in policy is to extend that age to 21. But still, if you don't give people the tools in those few years, they're still not going to be okay at 21, because we see homeless kids at 21 on the streets as well. So the financial inclusion, I guess, was the culmination of the work that we're doing in all the Hacks for Impact, and it seems that it's the precursor to social disadvantage as a whole. So it was logical that we had to do it.
And so the hackathon sort of it's 48 hours this weekend?
48 hours, so it starts on Friday, finishes 1 o'clock on Sunday. We're having it at M&M Studio. You can have a look at the Vibewire website to look at the address. But basically, we usually attract between 50 to 100 people at the hackathons. We have sponsorship from the Department of Finance and Services, so they will help us with a problem statement around kids leaving care. and iCare, which is the workers' comp people. So they will most likely look at people receiving workers' comp and what happens to them, because a lot of them end up financially excluded. They end up having to go on welfare after their payments cut out.
Okay, and so the people who participate, do they sign up, or what? How do people get involved in these hackathons?
So we have like an Eventbrite process where people can sign up for it. They can just reach out to me on Twitter or LinkedIn as well. But what happens is we have a blend of the tech people, so the startup tech entrepreneur people, with the subject matter experts. So we'll have people there from iCare, from Finance and Services, from NCOS, the New South Wales Council of Social Services, so that we remain very fixated on the problem that we're trying to solve. This isn't about your prowess at being an entrepreneur or developing another cool app that probably will never get used.
Yeah, there's a lot of those apps.
A lot of that. And, you know, this is our 4th hackathon in our series, so we're really conscious of landing a better outcome, and that people, if nothing more, get a better understanding of the problem. And what we find after every hackathon is people go and volunteer for organisations, people become more active, they start talking about these issues a lot more on Twitter. And, you know, like I've always said, government's hopeless at this stuff. And the men that have been running the institutions, because it's largely men that have set these policies, have only returned a worse result every year for the whole of the population. So it's really up to us as a community to stand up.
So something more disruptive, really?
Definitely.
Which is who you are, the chief disruptor.
That's right.
So
you know, shake things up. You know,
Yeah.
and what we find is we get so much inspiration from people that aren't attached to the topic, because they're not like, oh no, you can't do that because government won't let you. They don't care.
Yeah, they
So
start from
really
possibilities as opposed
push
to
our
barriers.
boundaries.
Yeah.
And show us what's possible using the technology. But as I say to people, don't get all excited about the tech, because the best startups come from the lived experience and people that really understand the problem. So you look at Jenna Lau from Home Care Heroes. She was caring for her father-in-law and then saw a problem that other people would experience, and she started a business called Home Care Heroes. She wasn't standing there saying, how can I make money out of home care? You know?
Yeah.
Or
And
how can I harness
saw a need.
technology on its own? The challenge there was, okay, this is the problem, how do we solve it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's amazing. We need to get her back on Women's Agenda and see where she's at.
Definitely.
Because she was one of a
Yes.
finalist in our Leadership Awards last year, so we'll find out where she's at and how she's going and profile her.
Yeah.
But that's it for our first show of Season 2 of Talk It Out. But at the end of each show, we do want to just go around the studio and share just a book, a podcast, a TV show, an activity, something you're doing that has got you talking at the moment this week. Anne-Marie still looks like she's thinking of hers, so I'll go to Georgie.
Look, this one, maybe it's a bit unoriginal, but I am just madly in love with Chat 10 Looks 3, the podcast between Annabelle Crabb and Lee Sales.
Me too. I think I've listened to every episode since number 1.
I haven't listened to all of them. I came to it maybe a year after it started. But the thing that I love about it, aside from getting very good book, movie, podcast recommendations, I just quite love the way they are two very clever women who are obviously such good friends. And I feel like there's so much warmth listening to them.
I love
and
the
it's
friendship
something
that comes through.
Yeah, so it just is I just love it when I see that a new podcast has dropped from them, and I always end up talking about something that I've heard or that they've recommended. So that would be mine.
I've read a lot of their book recommendations, and the TV shows. I don't get to watch much TV, but I do kind of. It goes on my list of must-haves, or must-do.
Yes.
Yeah, Anne-Marie, have you got one?
So, I'm going to be really daggy and say Women's Agenda, because
We're not even paying her to say that.
No, and I'll tell you why, because I really feel very strongly about this, that setting the agenda is not telling people what to think, but inspiring them about the issues that they should be thinking about. And I know I pick up Women's Agenda and I get stuff thrown in my radar that isn't always present to me, but they're issues that I tell you I get really upset, especially when you write, love. Like when Georgina writes it like an investigative piece, I really miss those old days of investigative journalism. It doesn't happen very often, but you guys nail that. And I feel really supported in being given the cross-sector of arguments. Like, you're very positional in one way, but in another way you give me an artillery of, oh wow, well, think about this and think about that. So for me, it's really important to have that as a touch point in my life, because I'm not big on women's issues, believe it or not. I don't think I am. And I'm not really big on reading a lot of stuff, because I tend to read more academic type stuff, learning. But this gives me the pulse of what's important for women today, not just in Australia, but globally. And that is a shortcut for me. So that's actually a really good tip for others.
That is good, and that's really nice to have on episode 1. And we are about to do a relaunch version of our newsletter, so we want to make sure that it is a great experience when people receive it, that they get a lot just even out of just opening the newsletter, even if they don't click onto a single story. So we had a big strategy session last week, and we're really excited about some of the new things that we are doing with that. And we're looking to also just grow our subscriber base as big as we can to try and reach into other industries, and just try and make it a lot more diverse, the range of opinions and the people that we're profiling, and have positive stories as well as some of the reality stuff that's on there too. I'll do my quick talk it out, because I intend on having one every episode as well. So I'm going to go with another podcast called Sparta Chicks Radio, which is about women who are just doing incredible things like skydiving or ultra runners, and it talks about their journey into fitness and to living these really extraordinary active lives, and really coming into finding what they are just superheroes at, even in their 40s and 50s, and sometimes into just really sport and big physical things. So it's a local one, a great podcast, Sparta Chicks Radio, really inspiring. And then a book recommendation, which is Diana Nyad's Find a Way, which is a great story of resilience and a woman who swam from Cuba to Florida.
Wow.
It is an awesome book. She did that in her 60s, I might add. So after multiple attempts, I didn't know anything about her, and I picked up that book randomly, and it was she does not give up. So if you need a little dose of inspiration, then go and check out her story. You'll find heaps about her online. That's our first episode for season 2. Thank you, Georgie. Thank you, Anne-Marie. And thank you for listening. And like I say, please tell people about this podcast. Thank you to Eagle Waves Radio, who hosts us in the studio here. And leave a review if you can. It all helps. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne.
That's a wrap for Talk It Out, the Women's Agenda podcast, powered by Eagle Waves Radio. Don't forget to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and jump on the website for more amazing shows. Catch you next time.